medical device webinar on software as a medical device. We are happy that more than 100 participants found time to join. My name is Moritz Pfeiffer. I'm a member of the Executive Board of Unity Switzerland and mainly responsible for the industry's medical device, technology and pharmaceuticals. With me are my colleagues Klaus Mueller and Daniel Neumann. Klaus is CEO of TWT Digital Health and expert for software as a medical device and medical apps.
Hello, everybody.
Daniel Neumann is senior consultant at Unity and advises companies in questions of end-to-end medical software development, digital platform strategies, and agile organization.
Hello, everyone.
Furthermore, Klaas Rakkebrand and Stefan Schlichting are joining. Both of them are experts in the fields of medical device and will consolidate your questions so that we can have a Q&A session at the end of this presentation.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
To create as much value as possible for you, we have some information up front. If you do have any questions, feel free to use the question function at any point of time. As just mentioned, Klaas and Stefan will consolidate these. Next week, we are going to provide the slides that we are presenting today, the consolidated Q&A session, and the link of the recording to the recording of the webinar. Within the upcoming weeks and months, we are going to host several webinars along our big picture of the medical device industry, which we are also showing on our homepage. This includes several fields from market and customers, business intelligence, to the development of product and services. Now, I wish you an exciting and educational webinar and hand over to Daniel.
Today, we will have a deep dive into the product and service development, focusing on idea to scope with success factors for the SaMD project, getting into a short definition for SaMD, as well as strategic factors for deciding whether to go for a SaMD approach or not. We will go together to the question of how to successfully develop a SaMD by prototyping as a start, as well as focusing on the major regulations and guidelines, summing up with a best practice approach that we have adopted for a specific product. And as a third part, the mastering of the go-to-market with key aspects of release and monitoring into the market, the specific aspects in the operations phase of a SaMD. And finally, we will give a short overview of the freshly introduced BfArM-DiGA fast-track approach for Germany. This webinar will be accompanied by 2 running examples, which will be covered throughout the slides. Before we get into the first section of this webinar, I would like to know if you've ever heard of the term SaMD before. So there should pop up a question right now. Please take 20 seconds at max to give us a short answer. Great, thanks for your participation. What we can see is that around about 64 people of you have said they already know the term SaMD and have heard of that. The rest of you has not heard of that. We will come to a short definition of that 2 slides ahead. Before we get into that, we would like to go into the prerequisites for, let's say, successful SaMD projects. What should be considered at all? Basically, what you need is, let's say, a small ecosystem of development operations partner for successful implementation and maintenance of the software product at the end. You need actual users to validate and to understand the requirements. You need an expert network to prove the medical purpose of the final solution. The domain knowledge, of course, to get the correct wording and to get the right contact to the users. And of course, key opinion leaders. You need to involve the luminary experts to make sure that you will be able to market the product in the end successfully. But to be honest, these factors also apply for every other successful software product. For SaMDs, instead, we see additional success factors we need to cover here. That's on the one hand, the regulatory environment, of course. You have to early consider timelines, for example, the FDA registration. You have to take care of the medical device regulation. You need a notified body to obtain a CE sign, but of course also a legal manufacturer as a legal entity that is being responsible for the introduction, maintenance, and observation process. I would like to give you now an example from a project that Klaus and I have been developing on. It serves us as an example also for the next slides, and we have called it SaMD. Our major factors were the software developer, the development partner, having a strong and, let's say, tech-savvy development partner was, ensured us to successfully develop the implementation, to operate, and, let's say, to follow the market introduction in the proper way. We had a market research institute on our hand to get indications early, given from an institutionalized market research, which helped us then assessing to follow a medical device strategy for the market. The regulatory affairs representative, especially as we were handling data from different hospitals. Therefore, we needed this regulatory expertise to be successful with pilot customers. And of course, the pilot customers itself receive valuable feedback and input to ensure the market introduction, whilst allowing the first mover, of course, to obtain some kind of partial user rights, etc., to make this fair. And well, what I must say at the most importance is, of course, achieving clarity about what entities and partners are required for a SaMD approach early in the development success, or let's say ensures the success in the end. Before coming to the next topic, I would like to give you another question to find out the expertise of the 64% of you about SaMD. Do you already develop software as a medical device? Please take 20 seconds. Great, thanks for participation. So it's nearly 50-50. Then I would think we should go over to a short definition and then getting a bit more deep into detail. So what actually is a SaMD? A SaMD, or in the long term, software as a medical device, is, according to the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, the software which is defined to be intended to be used for one or more medical purposes that perform these purposes without being part of a hardware medical device. So basically, this means being a medical device that's described on the left-hand side of the slide and being a standalone software. The software, of course, can have interconnection with other systems, etc., but it's actually standalone software like an app or, let's say, standalone application. So coming to the next slide, with the definitions in mind, let me present two exemplary software products which need to be discussed from us now, if they are a SaMD or not. Let's imagine you're responsible to decide which development product you pursue and focus on your dev team. You can only do one at the same time, and your company is a registered medical device manufacturer. Two ideas have been identified to pursue: SaMD, that's something you have already seen 2 slides before, and SaMD. Now, SaMD is a software application with the aim to improve the medication of a specific chronic disease using the retrospective analysis of previous patient cases and treatment data to obtain individual therapy proposals for the treating physician. So for this, it requires patient and treatment data from the hospital information system. And the treating physician is basically the main user of the application and is being used during diagnosis and therapy. So consider here, as you can see, there's a hospital information system in place. You should consider the interoperability standards to obtain, for example, like FHIR, etc. Those have been already discussed in a previous webinar by my colleague Stefan. SaMD, on the other hand, is a smartphone app which supports smokers in the process of quit smoking. It provides a smoking diary and regularly should remind the user not to smoke. Now I would like to know from you which of the products are to be considered as a medical device and therefore as their standalone software as a SaMD. 30 seconds would be great. A short reminder: SaMD is the application which gives you a more accurate therapy for a chronic disease, and SaMD is the app to reduce smoking. Okay, thank you for participation. So 82% of you said SaMD is definitely a medical device. 3% said that SaMD is a medical device and not SaMD, and 15% said SaMD and SaMD are a medical device. So let's find out if that's true. So for SaMD, what we can say is it is definitely a medical device. It follows the purpose of treating a specific chronic disease and therefore directly fits into the definition of a medical device. In the case of SaMD, as you already have said and have indicated to me, it's a bit more difficult, and based on the description I've provided to you, it cannot be made very clearly without any further information. We could imagine that quitting smoking is an influence factor for the prevention of several other diseases like lung cancer, etc. But as it's described, it's not entirely clear and finally decidable. So we could have multiple options here, like defining a medical purpose for SaMD. So it could be actually, as I said, the app could be used as part of a lung cancer therapy and therefore has an immediate purpose. Or deciding not to follow and develop it as a medical device, to have it as a, let's say, plain smartphone app. So considering this, starting a SaMD project is not only driven by the intended use of the product itself, but it's merely a strategic question which should be answered. Going in a medical regulated mode has a direct impact on development speed and change cycles, which you can see on the left-hand side of the screen. Please take a look at that and imagine now working on a software product such as SaMD. So you know that you have a medical purpose, as we have seen earlier. You need to develop according specific standards as you are a medical device. So you either have the choice between having the long effort for documentation and adhering to the standards, or actually not developing the software. For SaMD, we have more choices basically. So right now you do not fulfill a medical purpose as we have seen, and they are not a medical, and therefore it's not a medical device. But in the future you might want to become a medical device and classify this app as a, let's say, an app for preventing the effects of lung cancer by not smoking. And then you could already start developing it as a medical device. So if you have a view on the long run on the product and the product idea as well as the product vision, you might already start now developing it as a, let's say, in a quality ensured development area by documenting accordingly, and later switch over and say, okay, now I assume this is a medical device as I add a medical purpose on it. In this case, of course, the development speed and change cycle length will increase, but you might have an advantage in the market overall, as probably there's no app for this specific case yet, and you could get together with the insurance companies. Therefore, I honestly would give you following advices if you were in the situation of a SaMD use case. Consider the quality ensured development directly when you have ambitions to become a medical device. That develop an educated understanding of the market potentials. So execute, for example, a market study to identify whether the development of a SaMD to the, or let's say the product as a medical device, could obtain new opportunities and revenue streams for you. And in addition, the more you clear are with your scope, the more you can identify whether you have the preconditions from a requirement perspective to say you would go for a SaMD and a medical device approach. So now I would like to get started with the identification of necessary steps to successfully develop a SaMD. Major concern for most companies are actually the documentation accompanying the development, but we will see that major elements will not differ very strong from, let's say, proper software development. But first, let us have a brief look into the world of prototyping. This first step is usually not executed in the regulatory environment, so we are a bit ahead of going into the regulated documentation world to allow experimentation in short time. Following a prototype-based approach in the beginning helps you to verify whether your idea of your SaMD's intended use can be transported into a software at all or not, so you can early identify if you can really cover the medical purpose into the application. It also helps you sharpening the requirements and makes up your mind for possible solutions and probably possible alternatives. We usually differ between horizontal and vertical prototypes. Horizontal prototypes focus on the user journey from start to end. It aims for understanding the user and their demands along their workflow, as well as those prototypes can be very broad, like a storyboard or concept prototype, starting very early from like screenshot, iOS-like screenshots, for example, up to high fidelity prototypes, like already implemented front-end software framework implementations. Consider a higher level of detail here to sharpen and improve the requirements. And the deeper you get, the more you should involve user expert interviews very early to get immediate feedback and to get a good understanding of the customer. If you're unsure about the technical feasibility, the software stack to be used, or interfaces your dev team is unfamiliar with, start over with a vertical prototype. This might be implementations of mock or rudimentary backend services would at least allow a proof of technology. In this example of data integration interoperability, you could use, for example, open source FHIR implementation to check the compatibility with hospital information system or other devices. So now we will get over to the regulatory part. Once we are clear what we want to develop in a regulated environment, we have to start to follow some guidelines. So what is required then? The medical device regulation requires the application of the following disciplines: the application of quality aspects by institutionalized quality management. I guess you already know that if you own a QMS, which is certified by ISO 13485. The adherence to software lifecycle processes, which are certified by the IEC 62304. The execution of risk management, which is certified by ISO 14971. And the proof of usability, which is certified by the IEC 62366. So let's focus on the software lifecycle specifically for today. The standard for software lifecycle processes require the adherence to necessary steps throughout the development. So it defines specific phases to go through and specific targets, documents to be delivered. The steps can be seen on the right-hand side. So they start with a development planning, going over through the requirements analysis, which probably get lots of input from your prototyping phase earlier. Getting over to software architectural as well as detailed software design phase, unit implementation, actually the development, and verification, going over to the integration and the testing, down to system testing, down to software release. As you can see in the pivoted box, the process is accompanied with an ongoing risk management, which is directly linked to the ISO 14971 on the left-hand side. In addition, the design phases of step 3 and 4 are related to the usability standard IEC 62366. So now knowing about the sequential approach of the documentation, give me another question. Until which of the phases on the right-hand side would you allow major scope changes? Please take about 30 seconds. So great, thank you for your participation. It's a mixed result I see here. So most of you say, okay, by the end of the software requirement analysis, I should not change the scope anymore, or let's say majorly. That's followed by software development planning. So the first step of the regulation of the standard. And we have equal response of 20% for the software architectural design as well as the detailed design. So giving a clear answer for that, in practice, you do not necessarily need to the phases to full extent in this order as is shown here, but you need to make sure that you have to be finished within the order. So timestamps count with these phases. So the useful latest point for that should be actually the requirement analysis, knowing that if you identify major scope changes and feature changes later, you definitely can still do that, but you have to get back in the other phases before and make sure that the documentation fits there, and you apply the risk management again for these different requirements. So the more you know, and the more you know early, the better it is, and therefore invest a bit more time in the prototyping phase at the beginning. Let us now take a look on how we have adopted the regulations for SaMD to get to a ready to release product. As you can see on the left-hand side, we strongly couple on the requirements of the standard IEC 62304, which you have seen before. This has been chosen because our target technology stack was already very clear in the project. But to gain speed in the overall implementation after the architecture design, we adopted an iterative model, which covered the phases of the detailed software design, the implementation and verification, as well as the integration and testing phases, which you've seen earlier. We applied this in bi-weekly sprints, and in those sprints, we made sure to deliver fully finished increments, including their risk management, as well as their software verification. To ensure this, we needed to develop a solid CI/CD delivery pipeline, of course. As a learning throughout the development, we have also adopted a dual-track agile approach, which made sure that we slightly shift the design and requirement activities ahead of the overall development. So we changed the design and requirement activities to 1-week sprints. And this made sure that the developers are not bothered with design questions anymore, like where do I have to put the button exactly, and how should I apply the internationalization settings here, and can instead fully focus on the implementation and testing. This made us, that gave us the opportunity to give earlier feedback to the user, to the medical user, and still adhere to the standards which we had. We still had to, of course, have to do a full validation in the end. So basically the validation which is required by the standards, as well, of course, from a clinical point of view, to validate the intended use and, of course, the medical purpose. So now, this was my part. I would now like to hand over to Klaus, who will go to the post-market and the go-to-market phase. So Klaus, you can continue.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Hello, everybody again. And now, and now we have developed the SaMD, and we want to certify it as a medical device. In Europe, the process for the approval as a medical device isn't simply a certification like in the United States. In Europe, we have to declare conformity of the medical device. Here are some hints from me, the notified body. It is very important to take care for a notified body in time and immediately. There are still too few notified bodies. The waiting period can be up to 1 year. The following steps are necessary for this. First, you have to register with the authorities. In Germany, it is at DIMD, in Switzerland at Swissmedic. A central European database for registration is expected to be in place next year. This is called EUDAMED. Perhaps you have heard about it. Then we can label it with a CE mark and have to put it into service. The post-market surveillance now begins. Here there are 3 tasks that must be fulfilled continuously. Then the first one is the market observation. That includes, for example, the reporting of errors and deviations in context of the clinical field and medical use. Official announced errors of comparable products. You have to check the databases and announcements of, for example, the BfArM and the EUDAMED in the next year and the FDA. Changes in the regulatory, in the methods and the requirements, new methodicals, scientific insights. It also means continuous evaluation of the safety and performance and clinical re-evaluation. A good hint is that your own medical department can take over tasks in the post-market surveillance. Yes, the second one is the maintenance. It means for the main of the technical aspects and the quality management system. You have to check and maintain the software updates, regular updates like iOS major updates, Android updates, or critical hotfixes for safety problems. Maintenance of runtime environment, regularly performed random tests, for example, smoke tests, continuous optimization of your quality management system, and continuous optimization of your risk management. The notification requirements you have to notify in case of some events, incidents, reporting to legal authorities, reporting of drug-related adverse events to legal authorities too, and the reporting of data privacy issues. Now we have to go to the operation. The operations of a medical device, is there a difference of a non-medical device and the operations of non-medical devices? The differences to the operation of non-medical products are not as big as you think at first glance. You just have to do everything very carefully and according to the rules. And that is in most cases quite costly. I would like to highlight some aspects. The recall. You must also be able to recall a medical device at any time. For apps that are launched via the stores and for cloud applications, this is easily possible. For local applications, a backend component should be implemented. The requirements of the security of the software and the data have the highest priority. This is part of the development and the operation. You have to implement a software lifecycle system, and you have to think about strong encryption. We heard earlier that the post-market surveillance phase is part of the service of a medical device. It is therefore a central part of the operation. I would like to go into 3 more aspects that we consider to be very practical. If you have outsourced the services of legal manufacturing to a service provider, the service provider is also entitled to take the product off the market if there is a risk. As a client, you have no influence on this and must regulate it on your agreement. Sometimes a challenge for the legal department. Again and again, the question is discussed whether the big cloud providers, for example, Azure, Amazon, or Google, are capable for hosting medical devices. You really have to look at the fine print and also consider the communication effects this has on the market. The new BfArM guidelines include some hints. And the third one are the cloud services for development. Modern software development often uses libraries for developing. This is common on the development of apps. Here too, it must be clarified which data is stored and where it is stored. Firebase from Google is a beloved example of this. And now I would like to say something about the specifics for the German market. From summer 2020 in this year, any doctor in Germany will be able to prescribe digital health applications to the 72 million insured citizens of the German health systems. This regulation was pushed from the German Federal Ministry of Health, Mr. Spahn, and passed through the institutions very quickly. To realize such a project in this short time was quite unique so far. The process describes how many manufacturers can demonstrate that their devices meet the legal requirements. For example, the ordinance contains a specific checklist that manufacturers must use to verify that they have complete with the IT security requirements. The ordinance also regulates the cost and precise content for the electronic directory, as well as the procedure for inclusion. It is clearly defined. It is a clearly defined process, and there are clearly defined timelines. The definition of the digital health application is very short and very clear. The main function relies on digital technologies. It is remarkable considering that digitization is not a strength of the German health system. The device must be a class 1 or 2A medical device, according to the MDR or the NDD. It is not open for higher classes medical devices. It is important to note the following when defining the intended use. Intended use is centered around the patient, possible to include the doctor. It is one of the success factors that doctors are involved and reimbursed. Possible product functionalities are detection, monitoring, treatment, palliation, compensation of diseases, injuries, or in disabilities. The DVG ordinance already specifies the most important requirements for digital health application. The manufacturer has to prove the CE marking. We have talked about it in the previous charts. The patient safety and the consumer protection, the user friendliness for patients and physicians, the privacy and data security. This is one of the critical factors. Very high liability and a high risk of PR disasters. Two examples in the last year, the one was the ADA Health and the Vivi patient record in 2019. The robustness, the interoperability, and the quality of medical content are the most important requirements. And now I would like to give you a very short explanation of in Germany, it's called the fast track process for the digital, in Germany, it's called DiGA, digital medical application. The procedure makes a request, the producer makes a request to the BfArM. The BfArM checks the application of the producer and gives advice very necessary. The authority checks the general requirements like safety, quality, functionality, privacy, and data protection. And the authority checks the positive care effects like medical benefits, structural and procedural effects. Then the BfArM examines and decide within 3 months. They guarantee the 3 months. Then when both sets of the requirements are fulfilled, the digital health application will be listed in the DiGA registry. The digital health application may then be pre-described by a doctor and will be reimbursed by the insurance. When the general requirements are not fulfilled, the DiGA will be declined. When the general requirements are fulfilled and the positive care effects are not proven, the DiGA will be preliminary listen in the registry and a 12-month trial period starts. After successful preliminary period and the final decision of the BfArM, the DiGA will be added to the DiGA list and can be prescribed. And last but not least, the producer has to negotiate the price of the DiGA with the DKV Spitzenverband, the highest association of the insurance in Germany. This was a very simple explanation of the procedure. Details on all points can be found in the BfArM guide. But last but not least, there's one more point I would like to mention, which is not in any of the guidelines. You need sales power to bring a DiGA into the market. The doctor needs to know that your DiGA exists. And underline this point, the big pharmaceutical and medtech companies with their significant sales forces are at a big advantage. Okay, thank you very much. This was my part, and now I hand over to Daniel, and we will start over to our Q&A session.
That's right. So, Klaus, thank you very much for your part. We will now hand over to the question. So we have presented all content slides. Please, if you have to step out early or wait until the end of the questions phase, there's a survey at the end of this webinar, and it would be very great if you could take a minute and fill that survey out. And now it is time to answer your question. You still have the chance to also add further questions, but I would like to start with a few ones up ahead. So I have one here with a question: how important it is to consider SaMD already existing on the market, so from competitors, when deciding whether my own software is a medical device or not. So basically, from my point of view, you should consider, of course, if there's already one or more competitor in the market, and in this case, you have a very good chance and a very good opportunity to take a look at the product itself, at their product, to take a look at their intended use at medical purpose. And if you are still very sure that you're competing directly with this one, you should either consider to, let's say, make this solution better than the competing application itself. If you say you want to go to, let's say, a more flexible approach, not very fixed to the target intended use you are trying to focus on, and follow some kind of like the smoking app approach for like going to the App Store and just distributing to many users as you can, not following a medical device approach, you have a better chance to, let's say, collect data, collect user behavior, as well as get more insights about the actual usage and probably postpone the decision. That's also possible. I hope that helped an explanation. Then I would go to the next question. What is the most critical point within the development of a SaMD? So I think at least one, which I would like to point out right now. One would be definitely the during the requirements and as well as in the development phase, the scope creep. So you're right, in the development, you are identifying based on the feedback of the users that you might have some minor changes and probably also some kind of major changes which force you to go back in the requirement definition. And later, at a later point, you suddenly find out, okay, I'm either suddenly not a medical device anymore. What is even worse is when you have not focused being a medical device and do not have an intended use, but suddenly get into the range of being a medical device because you suddenly present something like lab values or aggregated lab information correlated with something different, which might help the physician actually to make a treatment. You might quickly fall under the MDR regulation and then have to take care that you register your medical device sufficiently. In the example of the SaMD app, this could be the situation when you have found out that you could probably correlate the data from the smokers with their, for example, with their Fitbit and find out, okay, their running speed decreases when they smoke too often, okay. And then be able to, let's say, to visualize these application and information coupled with some recommendations there. Then you probably very quickly in the case of a medical device, but you do not have a CE sign obtained. So you have to quickly go into the market introduction. So therefore, be careful of the scope creep and make sure you're right with your requirements as well as your, let's say, product decision in terms of roadmap definition. So I see. I have another one. How would you document the phases of the software development lifecycle? For example, the artifacts like UML diagrams, simply text, etc. So depending on the QMS you have defined, you have to also to define, let's say, the development activities at all. What is sufficient in terms of the IEC 36304 is classical, let's say, using the UML diagram format, banded by sufficiently describing text, is in many cases sufficient and also helpful for the entire team to understand basically the application. The most important part is that an auditor in the end can understand and can trace the requirement to an architecture component down to unit tests in the end. So that is something which is far more important to make sure the traceability in the end than to say using the specific modeling format. So if I can give you one advice in that, you should make sure that you have the traceability from requirements down to development planning as well as development execution. It would be perfect if you could link pull requests and merges in the end jointly together with the requirements. So you could, for example, use the Enlation suite with Jira and Confluence and make sure linking exists between the documentation level as well as the work level, the working level. But the current standards and the current standard models like UML are sufficient there. I have another one. Do team members of the development team have to have special certifications for software as a medical device development projects? So basically they have to be, they have to understand the risk management procedures. They have to be schooled in the company's quality management system to understand the standard procedures, the SOPs of the company they are working in for the development of a medical device. I am sure that you do not need specific certifications for that. The only thing which is important is once you implement a risk manager, that you have to make sure that they are sufficiently schooled and sufficiently, let's say, skilled. But for the development itself, the personnel must to know the processes as well as the regulations they have to hold on. But that's everything you can train them, but also via online trainings very shortly. I have another one. Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe one more right now. Is the intellect? Oh, you want to add something? I'm sorry.
No. I think I have another question.
Okay, I got one more, and then I think I can add over to you. Is the intellectual property analysis for a SaMD more difficult for a normal medical device? Do you have experience on that? So the IP analysis for SaMD differs only from, let's say, a normal software product in the fact that you have to actually, for SaMD, you actually have to write down what is inside and what is actually the specification for that. So you have to be a bit more open. This usually helps mostly competitor analysis to understand what is inside. But in the end, we are still talking about standalone software. We are still talking about software which is being market on the, let's say, placed on the market. And therefore, I don't see much difference actually. So Klaus, I think all questions which are aimed for me are done as far as I can see it here.
I only have a few questions. One is very interesting. What is the most critical point in the registration process? What is the most critical point in the post-market valence? What is the critical point? And so on. The answer is very easy. All points are critical, all points are not critical. All is defined in rules, laws, and guidelines, and you have to do these points that is set in these documents. And I think there's no really critical point in this one. You have to know what you do. I think this is the best answer for the critical question. And another question was, what are typical databases you can name for doing a search during post-market surveillance? The answer for the authorities is that other databases for search are in America, in the United States. It's called the MAUDE, M-A-U-D-E. Its products are available in the United States. But the post-market surveillance are not only this databases you need. These databases, Another source are journals of medical societies. You have to check technical sources, and I think this is they are the best sources. Not only to check the databases, you have to check the journals of the medical societies and the technical sources too. Where's the most? Another one. Where's my question? It is necessary to have a company to register a medical device. That's a good question. I don't think so. No, it is not defined that you have a medical device. That you have a company to register a medical device. It is possible to register a medical device to a person. Yes.
So
okay.
You got all your questions,
Daniel?
I got another one actually. Did you plan to register SaMDA as a DIGA? So as Klaus has already introduced earlier in the slides, DIGA is not implemented yet. We are currently in the process of considering actually to go with the SaMDA product to make it as a DIGA, to go into the fast track approach. But right now we do not see the entire preconditions for that. We see the opportunity and we are still right now in the evaluation, and as soon as we get more information on DIGA itself and get more insights of how we could let's say incorporate the solution there with insurance, then we would actually go and focus on that.
Okay.
see, I take another look if there are further questions. No, that looks good. So then I would like to thank you for your participation, for your active participation, your let's say your questions, as well as the answering our polls. I have one last question to you, which I would like to give to you, which we still have. Is SaMD as an anti-smoking app suitable to become a candidate for DIGA? So the last question, please give us a few more seconds, 50 seconds to answer this one.
I'm curious about the answer.
So great. 65 of you say yes, 10% said no, and a quarter of you is not entirely sure. So long story short, as soon as we give a medical purpose to SaMD, we would definitely be in a class 1 or maybe even a class 2A, and therefore we definitely could then register it as a DIGA. If we stay with this strategy and say we do not want to register it as a medical device and not focus such approach, of course, we could then not become a DIGA. So thank you again. Thanks for participation. And I think, Moritz, you have the last words.
Yes, thank you very much from my side for your participation and interaction in our Q&A session. As I have mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, next week we are going to provide you the presentation that we've presented today, also the consolidated Q&A session, and also a link to the webinar if you do want to go back to some single parts and specifics. Thank you very much. Stay safe, enjoy the rest of your week, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.